Back in the golden age of Hollywood, the dream was simple. If you were young, beautiful, and lucky enough to be discovered, you'd be handed a studio contract, made into a star, and live the rest of your life basking in fame and luxury. That's how the story was told anyway. But the reality behind those glamorous contracts was a whole lot darker, because for many women, especially the so-called contract girls, signing with a studio didn't mean protection. It meant ownership. These contracts weren't opportunities, they were cages. And what went on behind the studio gates was often way more terrifying than what audiences ever saw on screen. Hollywood's contract system was designed to give studios total control. These weren't just employment agreements. They were all-encompassing legal documents that dictated every aspect of a performer's life. Studios had clauses that allowed them to drop an actress for gaining weight, getting pregnant, or even just being seen in public without makeup. They could shelve you for months without pay or loan you out to another studio like a piece of borrowed furniture. You didn't choose your roles. The studio told you what to do, and you were expected to say yes, smile, and hit your mark. The actors didn't really own their careers, the studios did. And for young women hoping to make it, the pressure to obey was baked into every inch of the system. And that power imbalance opened the door to all kinds of abuse. Studio heads like Louis B. Mayer at MGM, Harry Conn at Columbia, and Jack Warner at Warner Brothers weren't just bosses, they were gods. If they liked you, you had a shot at fame. If you upset them, your career was over. Period. There were countless stories of women being invited to screen tests that took place in hotel rooms. If you went, you were expected to play along. If you didn't, the phone stopped ringing. Producers, agents, and even other stars knew the rules of the game. It was an open secret that to survive, you had to give more than just your talent. And nobody talked, because talking meant exile. You weren't just blacklisted, you were forgotten. Judy Garland is one of the most heartbreaking examples of how brutal this system could be. MGM signed her as a child, and from the very beginning, they tried to mold her into their ideal starlet. That meant giving her amphetamines to keep her thin and working, and barbiturates to knock her out when her body couldn't shut down on its own. Her diet was restricted so severely that she once said she'd sneak into the back lot to eat scraps from catering tables. Executives mocked her appearance, called her ugly behind her back, and pushed her into a schedule that would have broken most adults. And she was just a teenager. Her performances were dazzling, but behind every smile was a young girl being chemically managed and emotionally crushed. Marilyn Monroe's experience followed a similar path. Early in her career, she was bounced around between studios and powerful men who viewed her less as a performer and more as a brand to be shaped. She once said, "I wasn't the girl next door, I was the girl upstairs." Her public image was curated to perfection, blonde, curvy, playful, seductive. But privately, she struggled with depression, anxiety, and feelings of isolation. The very people who turned her into an icon were the ones exploiting her. And when she tried to be taken seriously as an actress, she was ridiculed for stepping out of her bombshell role. Even her relationships were often orchestrated. Marriages, affairs, and breakups all turned into PR tools, weapons of manipulation disguised as Hollywood romance. Then there's Rita Hayworth. She started her career under her real name, Margarita Cancino, but Columbia Pictures thought it sounded too ethnic. So they gave her a new name, dyed her hair red, and forced her to undergo painful electrolysis to raise her hairline. The goal was to make her appear less Latina and more palatable to white audiences. Hayworth later said, "Men go to bed with Gilda, but they wake up with me." That line captures the exact problem. Her screen persona, the sexy, confident woman in control, was entirely fake. In reality, she was constantly being rebranded and reshaped to fit the male fantasy. She wasn't acting anymore. She was surviving. The abuse didn't end with power dynamics or contracts. It was embedded into the very structure of how the studios handled their stars. They employed doctors, lawyers, and PR people whose sole job was to make sure the truth never got out. If a contract girl got pregnant by the wrong man, a studio doctor would quietly perform an abortion and bury the paperwork. If she broke down on set, they'd say she was fatigued and send her off to a rest clinic where she'd be sedated until the scandal blew over. And if she was assaulted, as many were, it was swept under the rug. Sometimes the abuser was transferred to another studio. Sometimes she was. The message was always the same: protect the brand, not the woman. And don't think these women could turn to the press for help. Gossip columnists like Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons were on the studio's payroll. They didn't report the truth. They printed whatever narrative the studio wanted to spin. If an actress tried to go public with what really happened, the press would turn on her instantly. Stories about mental breakdowns, wild behavior, or substance abuse would start circulating. By the time the truth could catch up, her reputation was already destroyed. It wasn't just character assassination. It was industrial sabotage, carried out by people who claimed to be your allies. Even training programs for young actresses were laced with manipulation. Newcomers were taught how to sit, smile, answer questions, and flirt just enough to keep men interested, but not so much that they'd get labeled as promiscuous. They were trained to never speak about religion, politics, or money. Their lives were so scripted that even their social circles were curated. Studios often arranged for actresses to be seen in public with certain men to spark rumors or kill them. Fake relationships were common. Real ones had to be approved. You weren't building a life. You were building a myth, one carefully managed photo op at a time. When a few women began fighting back, the system didn't crumble overnight, but it did start to crack. Betty Davis sued Warner Brothers in the 1930s for holding her back from serious roles and forcing her into formulaic junk. She lost the lawsuit, but her boldness shook the system. A decade later, Olivia de Havilland challenged her studio's right to endlessly extend contracts as punishment, and she won. That legal victory set a new precedent and finally gave actors some leverage. But even with these wins, the culture remained hostile. The studios still held the power, and contract girls still knew that stepping out of line came with consequences. Today, we look back at the golden age of Hollywood with rose-colored glasses. We admire the style, the grace, the timeless beauty of it all. But behind every iconic red carpet photo, there was a woman who had to fight like hell just to be seen as human. The contract girl system wasn't a launch pad for talent. It was a pipeline for exploitation. It turned dreams into commodities and gave powerful men the tools to control, silence, and discard anyone who threatened their grip. And while the contracts are long gone, the legacy still lingers in the way the industry treats women who dare to demand more. Because at its core, the contract girl system was never really about movies. It was about control. Who got to define beauty? Who got to tell the story? Who got to decide when it ended? And even now, in an era of supposed progress and accountability, those old ghosts still walk the halls of Hollywood, whispering reminders of what happens when the wrong people hold the pen.